This guide covers all the actions Dawntrail's Reaper learns from level 70 to 100 in order. We go over how each action is meant to be used and recommend ways to use it when relevant. We start with a tutorial on how to play Reaper at level 70, and then as we work our way to level 100, summarizing the changes in the rotation at level 80 and 90. In the final summary at level 100, we outline an optimized opener and explain how it leads into the general rotation, alongside 2-minute burst considerations. We also touch on the stat priorities of the Reaper. Now then, let's start with the signature Reaper debuff, Death's Design. This is a debuff that increases all damage you do to enemies affected by it. If an enemy dies while still affected by the debuff, you also generate 10 soul gauge. We will get back to this a bit later. Shadow of Death applies the debuff to a single target, while Whirl of Death applies it to everyone in an area of effect, or AoE for short, around you. Reapplying the debuff while it is already on a target will instead extend the debuff by an extra 30 seconds, but the debuff can never have a duration greater than 1 minute. You should make your best effort to always apply this debuff as quickly as possible. Even if an enemy is unlikely to live very long, the damage bonus from the debuff typically gives you more damage than you lost applying it within like 3 to 4 weapon skills. With 3 or more targets, Whirl of Death should be used over Shadow of Death, as it meets and exceeds the damage of Shadow of Death, and also applies the debuff to all of the enemies. Note that each individual enemy that dies with the debuff grants soul gauge as well, so Whirl of Death is one of the most effective ways to generate a lot of it. On 2 targets specifically, you may benefit more from using Whirl of Death to apply the debuff to both enemies, if you will need to switch between them within the next 30 seconds. Otherwise, on 2 targets, Whirl of Death does less damage than Shadow of Death. Next, let's look at your filler combos. Slice, Waxing Slice, and Infernal Slice make up your single target 1-2-3 combo. They each generate 10 soul gauge on use. For 3 or more targets, replace this 1-2-3 combo with Spinning Scythe and Nightmare Scythe, which makes up your filler AoE 1-2 combo. These attacks also grant 10 soul gauge on use. Both of these combos should be used whenever there are no more important options available. Conveniently, none of your other actions will cancel these combos, so you can always pause them to do the more important actions on time. Furthermore, combos stay for up to 30 seconds, so you have quite a while to return to this combo if necessary. For the sake of memorization, take note that all Reaper actions with the word Slice in their names are single target, while all actions with the word Scythe are AoE. Now, about that soul gauge, you have 2 abilities to spend it with that you can weave between your weapon skills. Bloodstalk functions as the single target option, while Grim Swathe functions as the option for 3 or more targets. Using Bloodstalk or Grim Swathe sets you at 1 stack of Soul Reaver, but keep in mind that if you use any weapon skill or spell that does not spend Soul Reaver stacks, you lose them all, so make sure to follow up with a Soul Reaver spending action immediately after. Take note that using Bloodstalk and Grim Swathe back to back will not get you to 2 stacks. Both of these spenders cost 50 soul gauge per use and should generally be weaved between your attacks when it is convenient. Speaking of which, you have 3 weapon skills to spend your Soul Reaver stacks. Gibbet and Gallows are 2 almost identical actions with very little difference. Gibbet does extra damage from the side of an enemy and also does more damage when you have enhanced Gibbet. It also grants enhanced Gallows. Gallows does extra damage from the back of an enemy and also does more damage when you have enhanced Gallows. It also grants enhanced Gibbet. When starting a fight, which of these 2 actions you use first is irrelevant, as long as you get the positional right, but once you have a buff from either one, it is important that you always alternate them to maximize their damage. Additionally, while affected by enhanced Gibbet or Gallows, Bloodstalk turns into Unveiled Gibbet and Gallows, which are completely identical, but happen to do more damage than Bloodstalk. This does not change how you use it. For the sake of simplicity, I will refer to this action as just Bloodstalk. For 3 or more targets, you can spend Soul Reaver with Guillotine instead. Keep in mind that Grim Swathe and Guillotine are frontal cone attacks, while most of your other AoE attacks are circles around you. Whenever you use Bloodstalk, you should follow up with Gibbet or Gallows, depending on which one is enhanced at the moment, and if neither is, you can choose depending on which positional is more easily reachable. Given the rarity of positionals in the Reaper's arsenal, you can make great use of the roll action True North to circumvent them quite often. On a targeting reticle, the open part is the back of the enemy, while the quarters near the left hand and right hand arrows denote the sides. If a targeting reticle is closed so there's no visible backside, and the front arrow is inside the circle, then all positionals succeed from anywhere. This is common in soloable content like Palace of the Dead or Boja. To finish off your offensive toolkit, you have 2 weapon skills that share cooldown: Soul Slice and Soul Scythe, the AoE alternative for 3 or more targets. These two weapon skills should be used as close to on cooldown as possible, as they are your absolute best sources of soul gauge with no competition. Make sure to avoid using Soul Slice or Scythe if you already have more than 50 soul gauge to avoid wasting any of the resources it generates. Avoid this issue by spending soul gauge if Soul Slice is about to be ready. Now, let's cover your utility actions. Harpe is your filler ranged attack for when you cannot be in melee range, or for pulling with if you need it. Harpe does the same damage as Slice, at least at this level, and generates soul gauge, so it is a decent option if you cannot be in melee range, but using the 1-2-3 combo is of course going to be more damage in total. For movement, Hell's Ingress and Hell's Egress are two abilities that share a relatively short cooldown. Ingress teleports you forward, while Egress teleports you backwards. They also cause your next Harpe cast to be instant, which can be helpful to fill a single GC while jumping away to avoid a mechanic, but otherwise there is no reason to spend this instant Harpe should any other action be usable. Both Hell's Ingress and Egress should be used only for their movement, and there is no reason to use them to access the instant Harpe cast specifically. Finally, Arcane Crest, also on a relatively short cooldown, puts a short duration shield on you to prevent 10% of your HP and damage. Try your best to use this ability whenever you anticipate or are actively taking damage. Noting the short duration is important, as sometimes using it when a boss starts casting a spell may result in the shield dropping off before the spell lands. Now, to summarize at level 70, let's cover an actual boss fight opener and rotation. If time permits, cast Harpe as the tank is running up to the boss, and then either run up to the target or use Hell's Ingress to close the gap. If there isn't time, skip this step. Start by using Shadow of Death and optionally weave True North. Then use Soul Slice, weaving Bloodstalk, and then use Gibbet or Gallows. This then leads to the general rotation. Reaper works somewhat on a priority-based rotation, and at this level, don't really have any big bursts to build up to anyway. This leads to the following priority list. 1. Apply or extend Death's Design if it is close to running out, say below 10 seconds. 2. If you have over 50 soul gauge, use Bloodstalk, followed by Gibbet or Gallows, depending on which one is enhanced. Keep in mind the positional bonus, and consider True North. 3. Use Soul Slice as close to on cooldown as you can. 4. Extend Death's Design if its duration is below 30 seconds. 5. Use your filler 1-2-3 combo, Slice, Waxing Slice, and Infernal Slice. An extension to point 2 and 3 is that if Soul Slice is not close to being ready, you can make a simple burst combo by stockpiling Soul Gauge to use 2 Bloodstalks and Gibbet and Gallows back to back if anyone else in your party has a buff you can benefit from. Note that you yourself don't have any way of adding any extra value to your damage by doing it this way, at least not yet. For 2 targets, consider replacing Shadow of Death with Whirl of Death if you're doing any meaningful damage to both enemies within the duration. For 3 or more targets, replace Shadow of Death with Whirl of Death, Soul Slice with Soul Scythe, Bloodstalk with Grimswathe, Gibbet and Gallows with Guillotine, and your 1-2-3 combo with the AoE 1-2 combo of Spinning Scythe and Nightmare Scythe. Take note that on AoE fights, when enemies die in quick succession, it will result in you generating a lot of soul gauge, so you should be extra aggressive in spending soul gauge as you get it on AoE. With that, let's continue on past level 70. At level 72, you learn the ability Arcane Circle, which increases you and your party's damage for a while. You should make sure to use this on cooldown, and in your opener, simply weave it after your initial Shadow of Death. As a damage boosting buff, you may benefit from late weaving it. However, there is an interesting interaction in the opener at higher levels that means you may want to early weave it at specific times. We will get back to this later. At level 74, you learn the ability Regress. When you use Hell's Ingress or Egress, the one you didn't use turns into Regress, which allows you to teleport back to your original location if used within 10 seconds. As an example, this can be very handy to dodge a boss mechanic, use Harpe, and then jump back in quickly afterwards. At level 76, you learn the ability Gluttony, which is a superior version of Bloodstalk and Grimswathe on a minute cooldown. You should do your best to use Gluttony on cooldown, which can be done by using it immediately after every other Soul Slice, or by stockpiling Soul Gauge when the cooldown is coming up. Gluttony uniquely sets you to 2 Soul Reaver stacks, meaning you can, and should, use 2 Gibbet, Gallows or Guillotine back to back after it. Gluttony also takes priority over Grimswathe on 3 or more targets, of course. For your opener, simply replace Bloodstalk with Gluttony, and then you can use both Gibbet and Gallows during an optional True North weaved after Shadow of Death. At level 78, Soul Slice and Soul Scythe become able to hold 2 charges. This means you can be a lot more laid back about spending these exactly on cooldown. And, if you like, you can even hold on to 1 charge to keep ready for Gluttony whenever or something. Aside from a massive quality of life boost, this doesn't change much. Extend your opener by using the second Soul Slice after your 2 Soul Reaver stacks are spent, and then use Bloodstalk and another Soul Reaver attack. At level 80, you unlock the Shroud gauge and unlock the Enshroud ability, assuming you completed the job quest line. Do your job quests. Gallows, Gibbet, and Guillotine each now produce 10 Shroud gauge on use, and Enshroud spends 50 to fill your Lemure Shroud stacks up to 5. While Enshrouded, which lasts up to 30 seconds, or until you're out of Lemure Shroud, Gallows, Gibbet, and Guillotine are changed to Cross Reaping, Void Reaping, and Grim Reaping respectively. Each of these actions cost 1 Lemure Shroud to use, and similarly to Gallows and Gibbet, Cross and Void Reaping enhance each other, so make sure to alternate them. They also have a shorter GCD of 1.5 seconds, so get ready to act a bit faster. Additionally, Cross and Void Reaping don't have positionals. At this level, you simply use Cross or Void Reaping and then alternate until you're out of Lemure Shroud. On 3 or more targets, you instead just spam Grim Reaping 5 times in a row. Take note that during Enshroud, only the following attacking actions can be used, and all other attacking weapon skills and abilities are disabled: Shadow of Death, Whirl of Death, Harpe, and the Enshroud specific attacks. This becomes important at higher level for aligning bursts, which we will get to at that point in the guide, of course. Due to how the Shroud gauge takes a while to fill, you can delay the use of Enshroud for a long time, searching for a good time to use it. The optimal choice is alongside other raid cooldowns like Arcane Circle, but to start, just try to make sure you use it at a time where you know you can use all 5 Shroud stacks, and remember that you don't have to use it immediately upon gaining 50 gauge. I also recommend planning your Enshroud such that they don't force you to delay Gluttony if possible. A weird interaction at this level is also that the buff that boosts Cross and Void Reaping stays after exiting Enshroud, meaning that if you can re-enter Enshroud within 30 seconds, you can continue the sequence for a very small damage gain. This is rarely important to optimize around though. Since level 70, Regress is introduced as a way to add to your mobility, and Gluttony and the extra charge of Soul Slice helps to improve your burst while also relaxing the strictness of using Soul Slice on cooldown. Arcane Circle is introduced as a raid cooldown and your only temporary damage buff, which you want to use on cooldown as well. Enshroud is also added to finally have a big burst option that your rotation culminates in. However, due to the time it takes to build up to, it is typically not available in your opener. The way this changes your opener is replacing the initial Bloodstalk with Gluttony, so you can use both Gibbet and Gallows. You can also use Soul Slice again after that for another Bloodstalk and another Gibbet or Gallows. I also recommend late weaving Arcane Circle after the initial Shadow of Death. When you have 50 Shroud gauge, try to plan it so that you can use it during buffs from other party members, or at the very least, while you can make use of the full Shroud, while not delaying Gluttony if possible. You can also use it during your own Arcane Circle, of course. Note that Shadow of Death is still available during Enshroud, so should you accidentally enter this without Death's Design, you can fix this during the buff. At level 82, you learn the spell Soul Sow, which is instant outside of combat, but has a long 5-second cast time while in combat. Using Soul Sow replaces it with Harvest Moon, a very powerful, ranged AoE attack, which you can use once before it turns back into Soul Sow again. Whenever you're not in combat, use Soul Sow to prepare Harvest Moon. Preferably, you want to find a good time to use Harvest Moon in every fight, as it is significantly stronger than your normal filler attacks. Soul Sow is only worth casting in combat if there is no target to attack at all. Casting Soul Sow and then Harvest Moon takes 3 GCDs, and Harpe deals the same single target damage as Harvest Moon in 2 GCDs. The specific scenario where using Soul Sow is better than Harpe, while you also cannot be in melee range to do something better, is so specific that it can be reliably assumed to not happen. At level 84, you learn the trait Enhanced Arcane Crest, which adds an AoE healing over time component to Arcane Crest if the shield is broken by damage. With this trait, you should try your best to use Arcane Crest whenever unavoidable damage presents itself, both for yourself and for your party, since the healing is for everyone. Furthermore, positioning yourself in a more central position for your party increases the chance that everyone gets to benefit. You also learn a trait which increases your 1-2-3 combo's potency somewhat. This does not change how you use it at all though. At level 86, you unlock the Void Shroud, as well as Lemur's Slice and Lemur's Scythe as an alternative for 3 or more targets. These 2 attacks replace Bloodstalk and Grimswathe during Enshroud. Spending Lemure Shroud stacks now also produces Void Shroud stacks, and you can spend 2 Void Shroud stacks to use either Lemur's Slice or Lemur's Scythe. This means you can use 2 of these per Enshroud. Since these attacks, like their regular counterparts, are abilities, you should make sure to weave them between the reaping attacks. Keep in mind that once the 5th Lemure Shroud stack is spent, you immediately drop out of Enshroud and lose all Void Shroud stacks you might still have, so it is important to get these spent in time. Aside from making your Enshrouds slightly more busy, this addition does not change your rotation beyond that. At level 88, Arcane Circle is upgraded to grant the Circle of Sacrifice buff to everyone affected. Each player, including yourself, that uses at least 1 weapon skill or spell in the duration of 5 seconds grants you an Immortal Sacrifice stack, up to a total of 8, 1 from each player. You also learn the weapon skill Plentiful Harvest, which, as it is, does an impressive amount of AoE damage in a line in front of you, but for each Immortal Sacrifice stack, increases its potency slightly. More importantly though, Plentiful Harvest also grants you Ideal Host for 30 seconds, enabling you to Enshroud immediately. This of course has a significant impact on your opener and rotation. Once Arcane Circle is activated, it will take around 6.7 seconds before you can even use Plentiful Harvest. As such, if you early weave Arcane Circle, it will be possible to use Plentiful Harvest after 2 more GZDs or so. If you instead late weave it, you will have to wait 3 GZDs most of the time. For this reason, I recommend after the initial Soul Slice to weave Arcane Circle followed by Gluttony. Weaving Arcane Circle as late as possible, but still early enough that Gluttony also fits, is optimal, but as long as you weave both, that's good enough. This should ensure that you can use Gibbet and Gallows, followed by Soul Slice, and then Plentiful Harvest to jump straight into Enshroud from there. Do the full Enshroud, and then finish with Bloodstalk and another Gibbet or Gallows. At level 90, you learn the spell Communio, which can only be used during Enshroud, and for that reason requires at least 1 Lemure Shroud to still be present. Using Communio immediately ends Enshroud, so it is considered the finishing move of Enshroud. This means you should use 4 Reaping actions and 2 Lemure actions and then Communio in every Enshroud. Since level 80, you've learned Soul Sow and Harvest Moon for 1 big attack per fight. Great for filling in a ranged spot or an AoE spot, and can be refreshed in downtime periods. Enshroud also expanded with Lemure's Slice and Scythe as well as Communio. Arcane Circle now also leads into Plentiful Harvest, giving you immediate access to Enshroud. This changes your opener a bit. Cast Harpe as the tank runs up to the boss, and then lead with Shadow of Death, then Soul Slice weaving Arcane Circle and Gluttony, then use Gibbet and Gallows, another Soul Slice, and then use Plentiful Harvest weaving Enshroud. Then perform the 4 Enshroud Reaps, weaving the Lemure's Slice, and finish it with Communio, weaving Bloodstalk, then finish with Gibbet or Gallows. The presence of Plentiful Harvest makes it very manageable to fit 2 Enshrouds every 2 minutes. The double Enshroud is performed by using Enshroud about 7 seconds before Arcane Circle is ready. Then use Shadow of Death, 1 Reap, another Shadow of Death, and then weave Arcane Circle, finishing the Enshroud, Plentiful Harvest straight into Enshroud again. Afterwards, do a 1-2-3 combo step if you have a combo running, as otherwise it will end prematurely. And then after that, jump into Gluttony, which may drift in this time frame, which is alright. The reason we stall with Shadow of Death this way is because Enshroud has a longer cooldown than the time it takes to spend Enshroud. To optimize this further, make sure to let Death's Design drop really low in duration before this burst. Notably, just make sure Death's Design's duration is lower than the cooldown of Arcane Circle. That should be fine. At level 92, Enshroud is upgraded to grant Oblatio, which changes Gluttony into Sacrificium, which is an OGCD dealing great damage you can use once per Enshroud, which you should, of course. At level 94, Second Wind is upgraded to heal you more, and basically all of your single target specific attacks, as well as your filler AoE attacks, get a potency boost. This does not change your rotation at all, however. At level 96, Gluttony is upgraded to grant Executioner stacks instead of Soul Reaver stacks. These replace Gibbet, Gallows and Guillotine with Executioner versions that do way more damage. This does not change how you use them, however. At level 98, Feint is upgraded to last 15 seconds instead of 10. This does not change how you use it. At level 100, Plentiful Harvest is upgraded to also grant you Perfectio Occulta. When Communio is used while under this effect, Communio turns into Perfectio, which is a weapon skill that does even more damage and is also ranged to be used right after. Notably, you lose the opportunity to use Perfectio if you re-enter Enshroud, so make sure to use Perfectio first. Now, to round off, let's first talk about an opener followed by general rotation as well as how this works with the 2-minute burst. And finally, let's briefly touch on stat priorities on gear. Let's begin. Make sure that Soul Sow has been used, then 1.7 seconds before pull, start casting Harpe, and then use Shadow of Death. If you intend to use a gem draft, late weave it here. Then use Soul Slice and weave Arcane Circle as well as Gluttony. Try to weave Arcane Circle as late as you can without delaying the next GCD as a result of weaving Gluttony afterwards. Then use Executioner's Gibbet and Gallows, followed by Soul Slice, into Plentiful Harvest weaving Enshroud. Then do 4 Void and Cross Reapings weaving Sacrificium and 2 Lemure Slices, at most 1 per GCD, and finish with Communio and then Perfectio weaving Bloodstalk. Then finish with 1 more Gibbet or Gallows. This then leads to the general rotation. The Reaper rotation is more like a list of priorities than a fixed rotation, given by its less frantic and more calculated nature. First, you want to make sure that Death's Design is active on your target, and extending it beyond 30 seconds in duration can be prioritized lower than most of your other cooldowns. Second, it is crucially important that both Arcane Circle and Gluttony get used as close to on cooldown as possible as you can. With regards to Arcane Circle, when performing the 2-minute burst optimally, it includes 2 uses of Shadow of Death, and so you can let Death's Design drop dangerously low if Arcane Circle is coming up soon. A rule of thumb is to keep Death's Design's duration below Arcane Circle's cooldown outside of burst situations. Next, you should make sure to keep at least 50 Shroud Gauge in stock for the 2-minute burst, and any Shroud Gauge beyond this can be used for extra filler in Shrouds. With basically no skill speed and no downtime, you will generate nearly enough gauge for 3 Enshrouds per 2 minutes, including the one granted by Plentiful Harvest. 2 of them will be spent during your 2-minute burst. Make sure to have less than 90 Shroud Gauge when Gluttony is about to be ready, to be able to effectively use it on cooldown. Remember that Enshroud takes around 9 seconds to complete at its fastest, so consider venting Shroud Gauge before Gluttony reaches 9 seconds of cooldown. Make sure to keep Soul Slice's cooldown spinning, but take note that the second charge has lower priority than most other cooldowns and can be kept around until an opportune moment presents itself. Harvest Moon is your strongest filler attack, but it is incredibly powerful for a lot of situations, so maximizing the moment you choose to use it is important. The best time to use it is when you're out of range to use melee attacks. However, if a later opportunity for AoE is guaranteed, then using Harpe and saving Harvest Moon for AoE can sometimes also be beneficial. Try to be creative with this action, as the best time to use it can vary greatly between fights. When nothing else takes priority, fill with 1-2-3 combo steps. The start of your 2-minute burst is signified by Arcane Circle's cooldown being at or below 9 seconds, and all you need to perform it is 50 Shroud Gauge. Let's take a look at the Double Enshroud 2-minute burst. When Arcane Circle's cooldown drops below 9 seconds, perform a 1-2-3 combo step, for instance, and weave Enshroud. Then use 1 Shadow of Death, 1 Reap, 1 Shadow of Death, and then late weave Arcane Circle. If you plan to use a gem draft, it goes before Arcane Circle. Then finish the Enshroud weaving a Lemure, Sacrificium, Lemure between, and finish with Communio. Then Plentiful Harvest straight into Enshroud again, finished normally. Then, after Communio, use Perfectio. And after that, if you have an active combo from the 1-2-3 combo step leading into the initial Enshroud, perform 1 step of it to keep it going. After that, or otherwise, weave Gluttony after it or Perfectio. Or, if you lack the resources for that, Soul Slice and then Gluttony into the Executioner, Gibbet and Gallows. If you performed a combo step a GCD before the one initiating the first Enshroud, but didn't continue the combo leading into this burst, you have to instead extend this combo after Communio and use Perfectio after. As long as your opener's done properly, then this double Enshroud burst should align with raid buffs, assuming you are in a coordinated group. For AoE adjustments, use the AoE 1-2 combo as a filler in place of 1-2-3 combos on 3 or more targets. Also, replace Soul Slice with Soul Scythe, Bloodstalk with Grimswathe, Gibbet and Gallows with Guillotine, and Shadow of Death with Whirl of Death. In Enshrouds, use Grim Reaping and Lemure's Scythe, but continue to finish with Communio. The main optimization for Reapers on AoE is that if you are in a single target fight that has moments where you need to move away from melee range, but the fight also introduces extra targets at some point, you may want to hold Harvest Moon for this moment to get more damage out of it. As Gluttony, Plentiful Harvest, and Perfectio all deal AoE damage, these should be used equally in any encounter. On 2 targets, as long as some of your incidental AoE damage hits both enemies, it is worth using Whirl of Death over Shadow of Death. Finally, regarding stat priorities, take note that in nearly every single case, item level beats out optimal secondary stats. This means you should always prioritize gear with higher item level as long as it has strength on it. After that, Reaper's stat priority is critical hit, then determination and direct hit. Determination and direct hit are almost identical in value, with determination being a tiny bit better, so try to aim for them to be about equal, with determination slightly ahead. Reaper does not benefit very much at all from skill speed, however, a GCD of exactly 2.49 is somewhat convenient for aligning things. This is reachable with a single grade 12 skill speed materia, which is recommended. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Dawntrail, Soul Slice and Soul Scythe actually scaled their cooldown with skill speed until you got the trait that gave them an extra charge. This was despite the existence of the note on the tooltip stating that the recast timer could not be affected by status effects or gear attributes. This was changed with the release of Dawntrail, although in reality this was only relevant when below level 78 anyway and seemed rather inconsistent.